Augustinus Vox presents On Music, Book 1, written by St. Augustine, published in the Patrologia Latina by Jacques-Paul Migne, translated and edited through prompting by Kyle Paulson, narrated by the digital voice of Kyle Paulson. Tell me, when you pronounce the word modus, what metrical foot do its syllables form,
It is a pyrrhic.
and how many beats does it have?
A pyrrhic is a foot that has 2 beats.
Good. And what kind of foot is the word bonus?
The same as modus.
So then modus and bonus are the same thing?
No,
Then why do you say they are the same?
because they sound the same, even though they mean different things.
So you agree that when we say modus and bonus, the sound is the same.
Yes, I can hear that the letters differ in sound, but aside from that, they seem alike in every other respect.
Tell me, when we say, for example, in Latin, verbum and adverbium, or in English, record and record, apart from the fact that they mean different things, does the sound seem the same to you or not?
Not the same. They definitely differ.
And how do they differ, since both are made up of the same syllable lengths and the same letters?
They differ because the accent falls in different places.
And whose art is it to recognize things like that?
I usually hear these things from grammarians. That's where I learned them. But whether this really belongs to grammar itself, or was borrowed from somewhere else, I'm not sure.
We'll look into that later. For now, let me ask this. If I were to strike a drum or pluck a string just as quickly as when we say modus or bonus, would you recognize that they have the same measure of time or not?
Yes, I would recognize it.
Then you would call that rhythm a pyrrhic foot?
Yes, I would.
And from whom did you learn the name of that foot, if not from the grammarian?
I admit it, from him.
So then, will the grammarian judge all sounds of this kind? Or did you learn to perceive these beats on your own, but only learned the name for them from the grammarian?
That's right. I learned the beats by experience, but the name came from grammar.
And yet you transferred a name that grammar taught you to something which, as you yourself admit, does not properly belong to grammar?
I see now, the name foot was given only because of the measurement of time. So wherever I recognize that same kind of measure, why shouldn't I apply the same word there? And even if other names ought to be used, since these sounds have the same measurement but do not belong to grammar, why should I worry about the names when the reality itself is clear?
I'm not concerned about the names themselves, but since you see that there are countless kinds of sounds in which definite measures can be observed, and since we admit that these kinds are not to be assigned to the discipline of grammar, don't you think there must be another discipline which includes everything that is rhythmic and artfully ordered in such sounds?
That seems very plausible to me.
What do you think its name is? For I assume it is not new to you that a certain power in singing has traditionally been attributed to the Muses. This power, unless I am mistaken, is what is called music.
Yes, I think that is the one.
But for now, let us not worry about the name. Instead, if it seems good to you, let us investigate, as carefully as we can, the full power and inner logic of this discipline, whatever its proper name may be.
Yes. Let us investigate it. For whatever this whole thing is, I very much want to understand it.
Then define music.
I do not dare.
Can you at least judge whether my definition is acceptable?
I will try if you tell me what it is.
Music is the science of good modulation. Does that seem right to you?
It might, if I clearly understood what modulation itself is.
Tell me, have you ever heard the word to modulate used anywhere, except in reference to singing or dancing?
That is true. I have only heard it used in those ways. But since I see that to modulate comes from measure, and since in all well-done actions some proper measure must be kept, and since many things in singing and dancing may delight us, yet are still quite trivial, I want to understand fully what modulation really is. For it seems that the entire definition of such a great discipline is contained in this single word. And what we are seeking here is not merely what any singer or performer already knows.
Do not be troubled by that earlier point. That measure must be preserved even in things outside of music, while in music it is called modulation. Unless, perhaps, you are unaware that the speech of an orator is properly called speaking.
I'm aware of that, but to what end are you saying it?
Because even your little boy, however rough or untrained he may be, when he answers you with even a single word, you still admit that he has spoken, do you not?
I do.
So then, would you also call that rough, untrained boy an orator?
No, certainly not.
Yet he has used speech, has he not? And even if we admit that the word speech comes from speaking,
I agree, but I'm still trying to see what you are leading toward.
toward this, that you may understand that modulation may properly belong to music alone, even though measure, from which the word is derived, may also exist in other things, just as speech is properly attributed to orators, even though everyone who speaks says something, and the word itself comes from speaking.
Yes, now I understand.
What you said earlier was very perceptive, that there are many cheap and trivial things in singing and dancing, and that if we apply the name modulation to them, this almost divine discipline seems degraded. That was observed very carefully on your part. So then, let us first examine what it means to modulate, and only afterwards what it means to modulate well, since that word well was not added to the definition without purpose. And finally, we must not overlook that the word science was included there also, for unless I am mistaken, the definition is completed by these three elements.
Yes. Let us proceed that way.
Since we agree that modulation is named from measure, do you think we must fear that measure might either be exceeded or not fulfilled, except in things that involve some kind of movement? Or if nothing is moving, is there any danger that something could still be done out of measure?
Not at all.
Then modulation may fittingly be called a kind of skill in moving, or at least that by which something is moved well. For we cannot say that a thing is moved well if it does not keep its measure.
That is true. But then we will have to understand this modulation as present in all well-done actions. For I see nothing that is done well unless it is done by moving well.
But what if, perhaps, all of those things are actually done through music, even though the word modulation is more commonly applied to musical instruments, and not wrongly? For I imagine you see a difference between, say, a turned wooden or silver object and the motion of the craftsman himself while he is turning it.
Yes, I agree. They differ very much.
And surely the motion itself is not desired for its own sake, but for the sake of the thing that is being shaped by it.
That is clear.
Now, if someone were to move his limbs for no other purpose than to move them beautifully and gracefully, would we not say that he is dancing and doing nothing else?
Yes, that appears to be the case.
When then do you think something truly excels and in a sense rules over other things? When it is desired for its own sake, or when it is desired for the sake of something else?
Surely. When it is desired for its own sake.
Recall now what we earlier said about modulation, that we described it as a kind of skill in moving, and consider where this name ought most properly to reside, in that movement which is, as it were, free, that is desired for its own sake and delightful in itself, or in that movement which in some way serves something else, like things that are directed toward an external goal.
Surely in the movement that is desired for its own sake.
Then it is now quite plausible that the science of modulation is the science of moving well, in such a way that the movement is desired for its own sake, and therefore is delightful in itself.
Yes, that seems very plausible indeed.
Then why do you think was the word well added, since modulation itself cannot exist unless the movement is already done well?
I don't know, and I don't understand how the question slipped past me, because it had stuck in my mind as something that needed to be asked.
A controversy could easily have been avoided altogether over that word, so that removing the well from the definition, we might simply define music as the science of modulation.
But who could tolerate you untangling everything in that way?
Music, then, is the science of moving well. But since moving well can already be said of anything that moves in a measured and orderly way, keeping proper intervals and durations, such motion already delights us, and for that reason it may quite fittingly be called modulation. Still, it can happen that such measured and pleasing movement brings delight when it is not appropriate. For example, if someone sings very sweetly or dances very gracefully, but does so playfully and frivolously when the moment calls for seriousness, then even though his modulation is beautiful and measured, he does not use it well. That is, he uses a good motion badly, because he uses it in an unfitting way. So it is one thing to modulate, and another thing to modulate well. Mere modulation belongs to any singer who does not make mistakes in those measured vocal patterns and sounds. But good modulation, that belongs to this liberal discipline, that is, to music. And if even that good motion does not seem good to you, because it is inappropriate, even though you admit it is skillfully measured, then let us hold fast to our earlier principle, which must be preserved everywhere. Let us not allow verbal disputes to torment us when the reality itself is already clear, and let us not worry whether music should be called the science of modulation or the science of good modulation.
I do indeed like passing over such verbal quarrels and despising them, but I still do not dislike the distinction you have made.
What remains, then, is that we ask why the definition includes the word science.
Yes, let us do so. I remember that this belonged in the order of our inquiry.
Tell me, then, do you think the nightingale singing in the springtime modulates well? For her song is measured and very sweet, and unless I am mistaken, it even suits the season.
Yes, that does indeed seem so.
And yet, would you say she is skilled in this liberal discipline?
No, certainly not.
Then you see how necessary the word science is to the definition.
Yes, perfectly clearly.
Tell me then, don't all those people seem to you to be just like that nightingale, those who, led by a kind of natural instinct, sing well, that is, who sing with rhythm and sweetness, but who, when asked about the numbers or the intervals of high and low tones, are unable to give any answer?
Yes, I think they are very much like her.
And what about those who gladly listen to such performers without having this science themselves? Since we see elephants, bears, and other animals move to music, and birds delighting in their own songs, for they would not pursue them so intensely unless drawn by a kind of desire, are such listeners not to be compared with cattle?
I think so. But this accusation seems to stretch nearly across the whole human race.
It is not as harsh as you suppose, for great men, even when they do not know music, sometimes choose to conform themselves to the common people, who differ little from beasts and whose number is immense. They do this very modestly and prudently, or else after great labors they take from such things a moderate pleasure for the sake of resting and restoring the mind. And sometimes it is very fitting to take such pleasure moderately, but to be mastered by it, even occasionally, is shameful and unworthy. But what do you think about this, those who play the flute or the lyre, and others who use such instruments? Can they really be compared with the nightingale?
No, not at all.
And why do they differ?
Because in the musician I see a kind of art, but in the bird I see only nature.
Oh, that seems reasonable, but do you still think we should call it art, even if what they do is learned by a kind of imitation?
Why not? I see imitation playing such a powerful role in the arts that, if we were to take it away, nearly all of them would disappear. For teachers make themselves available to be imitated, and that is exactly what they mean when they say they teach.
Do you think art is a kind of reason, and that those who practice an art use reason, or do you think otherwise?
Yes, I do think that.
Therefore, whoever cannot use reason does not use art.
I agree to that as well.
Do you think mute animals, which are also called irrational animals, can use reason?
Certainly not.
Then either you must say that magpies, parrots, and ravens are rational animals, or else you have called imitation art without proper thought. For we see these birds sing and produce many sounds in a way resembling human use of the voice, and they do so only by imitation, unless you believe otherwise.
I do not yet fully understand how your argument is put together, or how strongly it weighs against what I said.
I asked you whether players of the lyre and flute, and others like them, ought to be said to possess art, even if what they do in playing was gained through imitation. You answered that they do indeed possess art, and that imitation is so important that without it nearly all arts would perish. From this, it could now be concluded that everyone who attains something by imitation is using art, even if not everyone who uses art acquired it through imitation. But if every imitation is an art, and every art involves reason, then every imitation would involve reason. Yet irrational animals do not use reason, therefore they do not possess art, and yet they do possess imitation. So imitation is not the same thing as art.
What I said is that many arts are made up by means of imitation, not that imitation itself is art.
Then do you think those arts which make use of imitation do not also make use of reason?
On the contrary, I think they make use of both.
I don't object to that, but tell me, where do you place science, in reason, or in imitation? Why?
In both, I think.
Then you will grant science also to those birds to which you do not deny imitation.
No, for I said science may be present when both are present, but it cannot exist in imitation alone.
And do you think it can exist in reason alone?
Yes, I think so.
Then you believe art is one thing and science another, for science can exist in reason alone, whereas art joins imitation to reason.
I do not see that this follows, for I did not say all arts, but many arts consist of both reason and imitation.
And will you call that also science, which consists of both? Or will you attribute only the rational part of it to science?
Why should I not call it science, when imitation is joined to reason?
Since we are now speaking about the lyre player and the flautist, that is, about musical matters, tell me, do you think what they do by imitation ought to be attributed to the body, that is, to the obedience of the body?
I think it ought to be attributed both to the mind and to the body. Yet the expression you used is quite precise, for it is indeed the mind that commands, and the body that obeys.
I see you were careful not to attribute imitation solely to the body, but surely you will not deny that science belongs only to the mind.
No one could deny that.
Then in no way are you willing to attribute science, at the same time, and both to the sounds of strings and pipes, and to reason and imitation. For that imitation, as you confessed, is not without the body, but you said that science belongs only to the mind.
From the things I have granted you, I admit this follows. But how does it advance the argument? For the flautist, too, may have science in his mind. When imitation is added, which I admitted cannot exist without the body, it does not remove what he already holds in his mind.
It does not remove it, and I do not claim that all who handle these instruments lack science. but I do say that not all of them possess it, for we have pursued this inquiry so that, if possible, we may understand how rightly the word science has been placed in the definition of music. For if every flute player and lyre player and every performer of that sort possessed it, there would be nothing more cheap or base than this discipline. But now, pay very close attention so that what we have been working toward for so long may appear clearly. You have already granted me that science resides only in the mind.
Yes, of course.
Tell me, do you assign the sense of hearing to the mind, to the body, or to both together?
To both.
And what about memory?
I think it belongs to the mind. For even if we perceive something by the senses and commit it to memory, that does not mean memory itself belongs to the body.
That may be a great question and not suited to this discussion. But for our purposes, I think you cannot deny that animals possess memory. Swallows return to their nests after a year. Goats, as the poet says, remember their folds, and dogs are reported to recognize their masters even when their masters have forgotten them, and countless other examples could be observed.
I do not deny it, and I am eager to see how this helps you.
Surely it shows this: whoever assigns science only to the mind, and denies it to all irrational animals, must not place it in sense or in memory, for both of these exist also in beasts, and memory is not without the body, but only in intellect.
I see. And I am still waiting to see where this leads.
It leads here that all who merely follow sensation, who delight in what pleases their senses, who commit it to memory, and who move their bodies in accord with it, adding to this a certain power of imitation, these people do not yet possess science, even though they may seem to perform many things skillfully and expertly if they do not grasp, in the clarity and truth of the intellect, the very reality they profess or display. And if reason shows this to be the case for theatrical performers, then I think there will be no reason for you to hesitate to deny them science, and therefore not to grant them music, since music is the science of modulation.
Explain this more fully. Let us see what kind of argument it is.
I suppose you would attribute the quickness or slowness of a performer's fingers not to science, but to practice.
Why do you suppose that?
Because earlier you attributed science to the mind alone, whereas this ability, although commanded by the mind, clearly belongs to the body.
But when the mind commands the body knowingly, I think this should be attributed more to the knowledgeable mind than to the obedient limbs.
But don't you think it can happen that one person surpasses another in science, while the less knowledgeable one moves his fingers more easily and skillfully?
Yes, I think that can happen.
Then if rapid and skillful movement of the fingers belonged to science, each person would excel in it in proportion as he was more knowledgeable.
I agree.
Consider also this: you have surely noticed craftsmen striking the same spot repeatedly with an axe or hammer, and bringing their blow exactly to the point their mind intends, something we often fail to do when we try it, and for which they frequently mock us.
Yes, that is exactly as you say.
And when we fail to do this, do we not still know what must be struck, or how much must be cut away?
Sometimes we do not know. Sometimes we do.
Then imagine someone who knows perfectly everything that a craftsman ought to do, and knows it better than those who work most easily, yet is less capable in execution. And yet he can instruct those very workers in many things more wisely than they would judge by themselves. Do you deny that this happens in practice?
No, I do not deny it.
Therefore, not only the speed and ease of movement, but even the very mode of bodily movement, must be attributed more to practice than to science. For otherwise, whoever used his hands better would be the more knowledgeable person, and we could apply the same to flute players and lyre players, so that what their fingers and joints accomplish, because it is difficult for us, might wrongly be thought to come from science rather than from practice, imitation, and repeated training.
I cannot resist this, for I have often heard very learned physicians say that in the cutting or compressing of bodily parts, what they call surgery, a clearly manual craft, they are sometimes surpassed by less educated practitioners. Go on then, and finish this inquiry.
One thing still remains, that we try to see whether even these arts that please us by handwork, and which seem powerful in practical ability, may have followed nothing more than sense and memory and not science itself. Otherwise, you might say, yes, science can exist without practice, and is often greater than in those who excel in practice. But still, even those who practice could not have attained their ability without at least some science.
Yes, pursue that. It seems right that this should be made clear.
Have you never listened carefully to such performers?
More often than I would like.
Then tell me, how is it that the untrained crowd often hisses the flute player who produces ridiculous sounds, but applauds the one who plays well? And the sweeter the music, the more intensely they respond. Do you think this happens because the crowd is acting according to the musical science?
No, certainly not.
Then how?
I think it happens by nature, for nature has given everyone the sense of hearing by which such things are judged.
You judge rightly. Now see whether the flute player himself also has this sense. If he does, then his inner judgment can move his fingers while he plays, and whatever he finds pleasing enough, he marks and commits to memory, and by repeating it trains his fingers to move there confidently and without hesitation, whether he learned the tune from another or invented it himself, with nature, which we mentioned earlier, leading and approving him. Thus, as sense is followed by memory, and as the joints of the fingers follow memory, once they have been tamed and trained by practice, he plays whenever he wishes, and plays better and more sweetly the more he surpasses all those qualities we said we share with animals, namely the appetite for imitation, sense, and memory. Do you have anything to say against this?
No, nothing at all. Now I am eager to hear what sort of discipline this science truly is, which, as I see, has now been very carefully rescued from the company of the lowest and most trivial minds.
Not yet. What we have done is still not enough, and I will not allow us to move on to explaining that science until it is just as firmly established, not only that performers can satisfy the pleasure of the crowd without this science, but also that it is impossible for performers to be truly skilled in music unless they possess it.
It will be astonishing if you succeed in proving that.
It will not be difficult, but I will need your fullest attention.
From the very beginning of this discussion, I don't think I have ever listened with greater attention. But now I admit, you have made me even more alert.
I am glad, though you are really helping yourself by doing so. Now answer me this. Do you think a man truly knows what a gold coin is if, while trying to sell it at a fair price, he believes it is worth only 10 small coins?
Who would think so?
Now tell me, which should be valued more highly, what is contained within our understanding, or what is handed to us by the accidental judgment of ignorant people?
There is no doubt the former is far superior to all those things which cannot even be called ours in any meaningful sense.
Then you do not deny that all science is contained within understanding?
Who would deny it?
Then music also belongs there too.
Yes, I see that this follows from the definition.
And what about popular applause, and all those theatrical rewards? Do they not seem to you to belong to the kind of things that lie under the power of fortune, subject to the judgment of the ignorant crowd?
Nothing, in my opinion, is more uncertain, more exposed to chance, or more subject to the sway and whims of the crowd than those things.
Then do you think that performers would truly sell their songs for such a price if they really possessed music?
Your conclusion disturbs me quite a bit, but I still have something to object with. For that seller of the gold coin does not seem truly comparable to the musician. For when the musician receives applause or money, he does not lose the science, if indeed he possesses it, by which he delighted the crowd. Rather, he goes home heavier with money, happier with praise, while his discipline remains intact and unharmed. He would be a fool to despise these advantages, since if he failed to obtain them, he would be poorer and more obscure. But in obtaining them, he is no less learned than before.
Then consider whether we may perhaps reach our conclusion even from this point, for I think you will agree that what we seek as the goal of an action is far more valuable than the action itself.
That is obvious.
Therefore, whoever sings, or learns to sing, for no other reason than to be praised by the crowd or even by a single person, does he not judge that the praise he seeks is better than the singing itself?
I cannot deny it.
And what about someone who judges badly about a thing? Does he seem to you to know it?
By no means, unless perhaps his judgment is in some way corrupted.
Then anyone who truly believes that something worse is better than something better, surely, without question, lacks knowledge.
Yes, that is so.
Therefore, when you have either persuaded me or demonstrated that there exists even a single performer who has not either acquired or exercised whatever skill he has for the sake of pleasing the crowd or for the sake of profit or glory, then I will concede that someone may both possess the science of music and at the same time be a stage performer. But if it is highly probable, as I think you must admit, that there is no performer who does not set his professional aim on money or fame, then you must also admit one of two things: either that performers do not know music, or else that praise and other accidental advantages from others are more worth seeking than understanding within ourselves.
Since I have granted your earlier points, I see that I must also yield to these. For it does not seem to me in any way possible to find such a man upon the stage. One who loves his art for its own sake and not for the external rewards. When even in the gymnasium such a man is scarcely to be found. Yet if anyone does exist, or has existed, then performers would not for that reason be despised, but rather in rare cases considered worthy of honor. Therefore, please now explain this great discipline, which no longer seems lowly to me in any respect.
I will, or rather, you will, for I will do nothing except question and ask you things, and you, by answering, will explain all this, even what you now seem not to know that you are seeking. So let me ask first, do you think anyone can run both for a long time and quickly?
Yes, that is possible.
What about slowly and quickly?
By no means.
Then for a long time is one thing, and then slowly is another.
Entirely different.
Then tell me, what do you think is contrary to lasting a long time, just as speed is contrary to slowness?
No customary word comes to mind, so I see nothing to oppose lasting a long time, except not lasting a long time, just as to long we oppose not long. For even if I did not wish to say quickly, and instead said not slowly, nothing different would be meant.
You speak truly, nothing is lost in truth by speaking this way. For if there is such a word as the one that has not come to your mind, either I do not know it, or at this moment it does not occur to me. So let us proceed like this. Let us call these pairs of contraries, long and not long, slow and quick. And first, if you like, let us discuss long and not long.
Yes, let us do so.
It is clear to you, is it not, that we say something happens for a long time when it happens over a long span of time, and not for a long time when it happens over a short span?
Yes, that is clear.
Then a motion which takes, for example, 2 hours, compared with one which takes 1 hour, has double the time, does it not?
Who could doubt it?
Therefore, what we call long or not long admits of measures and numerical relations, so that one motion may be to another, as two is to one, that is, one has twice as many units of time as the other. Another may be to another as three to two, that is, one has three time parts where the other has two, and so on through the rest of the numbers. So that the intervals are not undefined and formless, but two motions stand in some numerical proportion to one another, sometimes equal, like 1 to 1, or 2 to 2, or 3 to 3, sometimes unequal, like 1 to 2, or 2 to 3, or 3 to 4, or 1 to 3, or 2 to 6, or whatever other measurable proportion may exist between them.
Please, make this clearer.
Then return to those same hours, and consider in full what I already thought sufficiently explained when I spoke of 1 hour and 2 hours. Surely you do not deny that one motion may occur in 1 hour and another in 2?
That is true.
And likewise, one in 2 hours and another in 3?
Yes, I grant it.
And one in 3 hours and another in 4, and or again, one in 1 hour and another in 3, or one in 2 and another in 6. Is this not also obvious?
It is obvious.
Then why should this not also be obvious, that between any two motions such a numerical proportion may exist, like 1 to 2, or 2 to 3, or 3 to 4, or 1 to 3, or 2 to 6, or any others you wish to name, and once these are known, it becomes possible to trace all the rest, whether 7 to 10, or 5 to 8, or any pair of motions whose parts are so proportioned that we may say this many to that many, whether the numbers are equal, or one greater and one smaller.
I now understand, and I concede that it can be so.
You also understand, I think, that every measure and proportion is rightly preferred to what is measureless and without limit.
That is most evident.
Therefore, two motions which, as we said, stand to one another in some numerical proportion, are to be preferred to those that do not.
That too is clear and follows logically. For the former are joined together by a definite measure and proportion contained in number, whereas those which lack this cannot be united by any rational relation.
Then let us, if you agree, call those which have such proportion rational motions, and those which lack it irrational.
Yes, I am pleased with that terminology.
Now consider this. Do you think there is greater harmony among rational motions which are equal to one another than among those which are unequal?
Who would think otherwise?
And among unequal motions, some are such that we can say exactly by what part the greater equals or exceeds the lesser, like 2 and 4, or 6 and 8. But others are not so, like 3 and 10, or 4 and 11. You see clearly that in the first pairs the greater equals the lesser by half of itself, and again exceeds by half, while in the latter there is indeed some relation, since they have parts that may be compared as this many to that many, yet not such a relation as in the first. For we cannot say what exact fraction the greater equals or exceeds the lesser by.
Yes, I understand now.
Then, among these unequal but rational motions, since I have set before you two kinds with examples, which do you judge ought to be preferred? Those in which that fractional measure can be stated, or those in which it cannot?
Reason seems to command that those be preferred in which we can say, as has been shown, by what part the greater equals or exceeds the lesser.
Rightly so. And shall we give them names also, so that when we speak of them again it may be easier?
Yes, by all means.
Then let us call those we prefer connumerate, and those we place after them denumerate. For the former are counted not only individually, but also by that very part by which the greater equals or exceeds the lesser, whereas the latter are counted only individually, and not by that exceeding part, since no such proportion can be stated in them.
I accept these terms, and I will do my best to remember them.
Now let us see how the connumerate may themselves be divided, for I think the distinction is clear. One kind is where the lesser measures the greater, that is, the greater contains it a certain number of times, as we said of 2 and 4, for the 2 is contained in the 4 twice, and would be contained 3 times if we put 6 in place of 4, 4 times if 8, 5 times if 10. Another kind is where the part by which the greater exceeds the lesser measures both, that is, both contain that part a certain number of times, as in 6 and 8. For the amount by which the 8 exceeds the 6 is 2, and you see that this 2 is found 4 times in 8 and 3 times in 6. So let us mark these 2 with names, since their distinction has already, unless I am mistaken, become clear. Therefore, if it now seems good to you, let those be called multiplicate, where the greater is formed by multiplying the lesser, and let the others retain their ancient name, sesquialter. For sesquialter refers to numbers related in such a way that the greater has as many parts above the lesser as the lesser has in itself, as when 3 is to 2, the greater exceeds by a third of itself, when 4 is to 3 by a fourth, when 5 is to 4 by a fifth, and so on. And the same pattern holds in 6 to 4, 8 to 6, 10 to 8, and we may observe it also in larger numbers. As for the origin of the name, I cannot easily say, unless perhaps sesqui means something like without itself, as when 5 to 4, lacking 1/5 of itself, is equal to what the lesser is. Tell me what you think of these matters.
To me, both the numerical proportions and dimensions seem entirely true, and the names you have assigned seem fitting for recalling the things we have understood. And the explanation you have offered for the origin of this term does not seem unreasonable, even if perhaps it is not the same intention as that of the one who first coined it.
I agree with you and accept your view, but do you see that all these rational motions, those that have some numerical proportion between them, can go on to infinity through the numbers, unless reason once again restrains them and brings them back to a certain fixed pattern and form? To start with the equal ones, if I say 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4, and so on, what end will there be, since number itself has no end? Number has this power. Any number we actually name is finite, but the number we do not yet name stretches on to infinity. And what happens with equal numbers also happens with unequal ones, whether multiplicate or sesquialter or connumerate or denumerate. For if you start with 1 to 2 and want to stay in that kind of ratio, saying 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and so on, there is no end. Or if you stay only with doubles, 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and further, there is no end here either. It is the same with triples alone or quadruples alone or any such pattern you like. It runs off to infinity. So too with sesquialter ratios. If you say 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, nothing stops you from carrying on through the rest with no boundary. Or if you stay in that same pattern but keep the same kind of ratio, like 2 to 3, 4 to 6, 6 to 9, 8 to 12, 10 to 15, and so on, or in any other such series, still there is no end. And what is the point of speaking at length about denumerate ratios, when, from what has already been said, anyone can see that, as you climb step by step in them, there is again no end? Does it not seem so to you?
Nothing could be truer than that. But now I eagerly want to know the rule which calls this infinity back and lays down a fixed pattern and form that ought not be exceeded.
You will discover that, as with the other things, you already know it, when you answer my questions truthfully. Since we are dealing with measured motions, I ask first whether we ought to consult the numbers themselves, so that whatever fixed laws they show us, we may recognize and observe those same laws in the motions.
Yes, I agree. I don't think anything can be arranged more orderly than that.
Then let us, if you wish, begin from the very starting point of the numbers in this inquiry. Let us see, as far as our minds can grasp such things, what the reason is that, although number, as we said, can progress to infinity, human beings have set certain joints or articulations in their counting, places from which we return again to one, which is the beginning of the numbers. In counting, we proceed from 1 up to 10, and then we return again to 1. And if you follow the series of tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, the progression runs up to 100. If you follow hundreds, 100, 200, 300, 400, the next joint is at 1000, from which we again return. What more is there to seek beyond this? You see, of course, what I mean by these articulations. Their first rule is prescribed by the number 10. For just as 10 has 1 10 times, so 100 has 10 10 times, and 1000 has 110 times, and so on as far as you wish to go. Everywhere these joints repeat what is first laid down in the number 10. Do you fail to understand any of this?
No. Everything is perfectly clear and absolutely true.
Then let us carefully examine why it is that we progress from 1 up to 10, and from there return to 1 again. So I ask you, can there be such a thing as a beginning if it is not the beginning of something?
No, that is impossible.
And what we call an end, can it exist except as the end of something?
That too is impossible.
And do you think one can go from a beginning to an end without some middle?
No, I do not.
So for something to be whole, it must have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes, that seems right.
Tell me then, in what number do you see beginning, middle, and end all contained?
Suppose you want me to answer 3, since there are 3 things you just asked about.
You suppose correctly, so you see that in the number 3 there is a kind of perfection, because it is a whole. It has beginning, middle, and end.
I see that clearly.
And from childhood we learned that every number is either even or odd, didn't we?
Yes, that is true.
Then remember and tell me which number we call even and which odd.
A number that can be divided into 2 equal parts is called even. One that cannot be so divided is called odd.
Good, you've got it. Since 3 is the first number that is both whole and odd, having, as we said, beginning, middle, and end, must there not also be some even number that is whole and perfect, in which we likewise find a beginning, a middle, and an end?
Yes, there must be.
But such an even number cannot have a single indivisible middle like the odd one, for if it did, it could not be divided into 2 equal parts, which is the property we assigned to even numbers. An indivisible middle is 1, a divisible middle is 2, and the middle among numbers is that from which each side is equal to the other. Am I speaking too obscurely for you to follow?
Not at all. I understand these things as well. And as I look for an even number that is whole, the first that comes to mind is 4. For how could those 3 elements, beginning, middle, and end, be found in the number 2?
That is exactly what I wanted you to say, and what sheer reason forces us to admit. So go back now to 1 itself and consider the sequence. You will see that 1 has no middle or end because it is only a beginning, or rather, it is a beginning because it lacks middle and end.
That's clear.
What then shall we say about 2? Can we see in it a beginning and a middle, when there can be no middle without an end, or a beginning and an end, when we cannot reach an end without some middle?
Reason forces me to admit this, and I truly don't know what to say about that number.
See then whether this number 2 may be a kind of beginning of numbers. For if, as you just admitted, it lacks both middle and end, what remains except that it also be a beginning? Or do you hesitate to admit 2 beginnings?
I hesitate very much.
And you would be right to hesitate if the 2 beginnings were set up opposite each other. But that's not the case. The second beginning comes from the first. The first comes from no other, but the second comes from it. 1 and 1 are 2. The principles are both beginnings, yet all numbers come from 1, and because they are formed by a kind of combining and adding, the origin of combination and addition is rightly assigned to the number 2. So, The first principle is that from which all numbers are, the second is that through which all numbers come to be, unless you have some objection to raise against this.
I have nothing to object. I can only marvel at these things. Even though, when you ask, I am myself the one who gives the answers.
These matters are examined more subtly and deeply in the science devoted to number, but here, since we must return to our musical task as quickly as we can, let us only use what directly serves that purpose. So tell me, now when we join 1 to 2, what do we get?
3.
So when these two principles of the numbers are joined together, they form a whole and perfect number.
Yes.
And when we count, what number do we place after 1 and 2?
The same 3.
So that same number, which is formed from 1 and 2, is placed in order after them both, with no number in between.
Yes, I see that.
And you should see this as well, that in no other numbers can this happen. If you take any two numbers in the counting order and join them, the sum does not immediately follow them without a gap.
I see that too. For if I take 2 and 3, which are adjacent, they make 5. But 5 does not follow immediately after them, because 4 comes first. Again, 3 and 4 make 7. But between 4 and 7 stand 5 and 6. And the further I progress, the more numbers come between.
So there is a great harmony in these first three numbers. We say 1, 2, 3, and nothing can be placed between them, and 1 and 2 together are precisely 3.
That really is a great harmony.
And is it not worth noticing that the tighter and closer this harmony is, the more it tends toward unity, making, as it were, one thing out of several?
It is very much worth noticing, and somehow I both marvel at and love the unity you are pointing out.
I am very pleased, for any bond and connection of things brings them most into oneness when both the middle agrees with the extremes, and the extremes agree with the middle.
Yes, that is how it should be.
Then let us see whether this is true here when we say 1, 2, 3, which are the extremes and which the middle.
1 and 3 are the extremes, 2 is the middle.
Now answer this. What do we get when we add the two extremes 1 and 3?
4.
And what about the middle, which is a single number? It cannot be joined to anything but itself. So tell me, what do we get when we take 2 twice?
4 again.
So the middle agrees with the extremes, and the extremes agree with the middle. As 3 stands out, because it follows 1 and 2 and is composed of 1 and 2, so 4 stands out because it follows 1, 2, and 3 and is composed of 1 and 3 or of 2 taken twice. This mutual agreement of extremes with the middle and middle with extremes is what the Greeks call proportion. Some of our people also use that Latin word proportio for it, and if you like, we can use that term. I don't freely use Greek words in Latin unless necessity presses.
I'm happy to use it. Please go on with where you were heading.
I will. What proportion is and how much power it has in matters of learning, we will examine more thoroughly in its proper place in this discipline. The more you grow in understanding, the better you will know its force and nature. For now, what matters is this. Those 3 numbers whose harmony you admired, 1, 2, and 3, could not be brought together into one connected relation except by the number 4. Therefore 4 rightly follows them, so that this harmony may be bound to them more tightly, and so the friendly progression becomes not just 1, 2, 3, but 1, 2, 3, 4.
I completely agree.
Now look at the rest, so you won't think the number 4 has no special property by which it helps this connection, a property other numbers lack. We already agreed earlier that many things can most become one out of many when the middle and the extremes agree with each other.
Yes.
When we place 1, 2, and 3 together, we already saw this. Now consider the whole from 1 up to 4, and you will see a very just and beautiful pattern of progression. In that earlier agreement, 1 and 3 were the extremes and 2 the middle. Now in this larger group, 1, 2, 3, 4, tell me again, Which are the extremes and which is the middle?
1 and 4 are extremes. 2 and 3 are in the middle.
Good. Now tell me, what do we get when we add the extremes 1 and 4?
5.
And what do we get if we add together the two middle numbers, 2 and 3?
Also 5.
So again, the middle agrees with the extremes and the extremes with the middle. And just as 3 was composed of 1 and 2, so 4 was shown to be composed of 1 and 3, or of 2 taken twice. In both cases, we have that same proportional agreement, the proportio we mentioned. Do you see this clearly?
Yes, clearly.
Then try the same thing in the other numbers and see whether we find in them what we have said is the special property of 4.
I will. Suppose we take 2, 3, and 4. The extremes, 2 and 4, add to 6, and the middle 3, doubled also makes 6. Yet the number that follows them is not 6, but 5. Again, if I take 3, 4, and 5, the extremes, 3 and 5, make 8, and the middle doubled also makes 8. But between 5 and 8, I now see not 1, but 2 intervening numbers, 6 and 7. And the further I go, the larger these gaps become.
I see that you have understood and truly know what has been said. So, not to linger too long, you surely notice that from 1 up to 4 there is a perfectly just progression, whether because we have both odd and even there, 3 is the first whole odd number, 4 the first whole even, or because 1 and 2 are principles, and as it were, seeds of the numbers from which 3 is formed, so that there are 3 numbers. When those 3, 1, 2, and 3, are joined in proportion, the number 4 emerges and is born, and for this reason is rightly added to them, so that up to it we have the measured progression we were seeking.
I understand.
Good. But do you remember what we originally set out to investigate? As I recall, we wanted to see why, in that infinity of numbers, certain joints are fixed for counters. And, in particular, why the first joint is at 10, which has such great force among the rest. That is, why after counting from 1 up to 10, we then return to 1.
Yes. I remember that this was the reason for all our wandering, but I don't see what we have done that resolves that question. All our reasoning seems to have concluded that a just and measured progression goes up only to 4, not to 10.
Then you do not yet see what total is formed from 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 together?
Now I see it. I see it, and I marvel at everything. And I admit that the question has been solved. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 makes 10.
So we must agree that these first 4 numbers, and the series and connection that binds them, have a place of honor among all the numbers.
Yes, we must.
Now it is time to return to those motions that belong properly to this discipline, and for whose sake we have considered all this about numbers, which belongs, strictly speaking, to another science, as far as seemed sufficient for our task. So now I ask you this. When earlier, for the sake of understanding, we spoke of motions taking an hour or 2 hours, and reason showed that these motions could stand in numerical proportion to one another. If one person were to run for the space of 1 hour, and another afterward for 2 hours, could you, without looking at a clock, a water clock, or any similar device, feel that one motion is simple and the other double, or at least take any delight in that harmony?
Not at all.
But what if someone claps in a measured way, so that one clap holds a simple time unit and the next twice as long, what musicians call iambic feet, and he continues and weaves this pattern together, while another person dances to that same sound, moving his limbs according to those times? Would you not either say outright that the pattern of times is such that simple and double spans alternate in the motions, whether in the clapping you hear or the dancing you see, or at least feel some pleasure in the measured pattern, even if you could not state the numbers that define it?
Yes, it is exactly as you say. Those who know these numbers not only feel them in the clapping and dancing, but can state them easily. Those who do not know them and cannot name them still do not deny that they are enjoying a certain kind of pleasure that arises from them.
Since therefore all motions that are well modulated belong, we cannot deny it, to the very heart of this discipline, if it really is the science of modulating well, and especially those motions that do not serve some external end, but contain in themselves their own beauty and delight. Yet those motions, as you rightly answered, when they are stretched over a long span of time, so that the measured pattern itself fills an hour or more, cannot match our senses. So, as music, coming forward, so to speak, from its most hidden inner chambers, has planted certain traces of itself in our senses and in the things we perceive, should we not first follow those traces so that we may be led more easily and without error, if possible, to those inner chambers I just mentioned?
Yes, we certainly should. And I urgently beg you that we do so now.
Then let us set aside those long stretches of time that go beyond the reach of our senses. Let us, as far as reason will lead us, discuss those brief spans and small intervals which charm us in singing and dancing, unless, of course, you think there is any other way to track those traces which this discipline has planted in our senses and in the things we can perceive.
No, I do not think there is any other way.
Thank you for listening to this translation of Book 1 of Augustine's On Music, presented by Augustinus Vox. To experience this work, reimagined as an atmospheric 1980s rock meditation, tracing the journey from bodily rhythm and poetic measure to the inner numbers of the mind and the harmony of the soul, be sure to explore the corresponding musical projects by Augustinus Vox and Sapientiae Lux, inspired by Augustine's On Music. Augustinus Vox is a restless heart project that reimagines the writings of Augustine and the voices of antiquity through the power and emotion of 1980s rock, bringing ancient wisdom to modern ears through music, translations, and creative exploration. To learn more, please visit augustinusvox.com.